The galaxy was wide and endless, but even in its vast silence, a mother could feel when something was wrong. The Queen of the Krell Empire stood on the edge of her warship, staring at the cold stars. Her warrior daughters had gone missing. Two of her brightest, strongest, and most loyal children had vanished during a patrol. They were born to fight, born to protect the Empire, but now they were simply gone. The Queen had ruled for centuries, and she had seen countless battles. But this pain was different. This was not about soldiers or fleets or kingdoms. This was about her daughters. The bond between mother and child cut deeper than any blade. And now, the silence of space mocked her. Reports came in from her generals. They spoke of failed scans, broken signals, and empty trails. They said the daughter's ship had sent one last weak beacon before vanishing near a forgotten sector. A place where old colonies once lived. A place most believed was dead. And yet, one name returned again and again in whispers. Humans. The Queen narrowed her eyes. The humans were not part of her empire. They were strange, distant creatures who had spread across the stars in small numbers. Most races ignored them. They had no great fleets, no mighty weapons, no shining empires. But somehow they survived. The Queen did not trust coincidence. If her daughter's last signal pointed toward a human world, then there was a reason. Far away, on the surface of that quiet planet, two warrior sisters opened their eyes. Their memories were broken, their bodies weak. Their ship was gone, their weapons lost. Only the sharp memory of falling fire remained. They remembered the storm in space, the engines screaming, and the crash. And then darkness. The older sister tried to rise, but pain held her down. The younger one crawled toward her, whispering words of courage. But before either could move further, a shadow fell across them. Not a soldier, not an alien beast, but a man, a human. His eyes were calm, yet sharp. His clothes were torn from work, not war. He carried no blade, no gun. Instead, he reached out with his hands, open and steady. The sisters prepared to fight, but their strength betrayed them. The man spoke in a soft voice, words they barely understood. His tone was not of threat, but of care. And then, darkness claimed them once more. When they woke again, they were not in chains. They were not in cages. They were in a small shelter made of wood and stone. A fire burned in the middle, giving warmth against the cold. The human was there, moving quietly, preparing food. The sisters whispered to each other in confusion. Why would a human help them? Why were they alive? Back on the warship, the Queen listened to the endless reports. Her generals wanted to send fleets into the sector. They wanted to burn the sky until her daughters were found. But the Queen shook her head. Something deeper was at play here. She had fought wars for centuries, and she knew the weight of strategy. The humans were not simple. If they were tied to her daughter's fate, then this was no accident. And accidents did not happen in her galaxy. Her heart raged, but she held her face like stone. No soldier could see her pain. No advisor could hear her fear. But inside, the Queen whispered a promise. I will find you, my daughters. And in that vow was both fury and love. On the planet, the daughters slowly gained strength. They watched the human with suspicion. They waited for betrayal. But none came. Instead, he gave them water, simple food, and even his blanket on the coldest night. He asked for nothing. The younger sister whispered, "Why is he doing this?" The older one could not answer. For all their training, for all their knowledge of war, they could not understand kindness. The storm outside raged on. Lightning tore across the sky. Wind screamed through the trees. But inside that fragile human shelter, there was peace. The daughters did not trust it, but they felt it, and that feeling grew. In the darkness above, the Queen's warship moved closer to the human colony. The galaxy held its breath. Somewhere between war and hope, a secret was waiting. The story of her warrior daughters was only beginning, and the humans, those fragile creatures the galaxy ignored, were at the center of it. The warrior daughters were not used to weakness. They were born for battle, trained since childhood. They were told their bodies were weapons, their minds were sharp steel. But now, in this strange human shelter, they felt powerless. Every breath was heavy, every muscle sore. They were alive, but they hated the feeling of being saved. The human moved about with quiet steps. He lit the fire, stirred a pot, and mended broken tools. There was no armor on him, no badge of rank. He looked like a worker, a farmer, maybe even a wanderer. Yet he carried himself with the calm of someone who feared nothing. The older daughter narrowed her eyes. "Why does he help us?" she whispered. The younger shook her head. "I do not know." The human did not understand their language, and they did not fully understand his. But he did not need words. When one sister tried to stand and fell, he caught her. When they shivered in the night, he gave them his blanket. When hunger twisted their stomachs, he placed food before them. There was no cruelty in his eyes, only patience. That patience was stranger to them than any weapon. Outside, the planet was not quiet. Storms clawed at the mountains. Strange beasts howled in the distance. The human's home was small, weak by alien standards, but somehow it endured. The sisters could not understand how such fragile walls had survived so long. And yet they did. The human was the reason. On the second day, he took them outside. The air was sharp and cold, but fresh. The forest stretched wide, full of shadows and secrets. The human showed them a stream of clear water. He motioned for them to drink. They hesitated, warriors enused to trusting strangers. But thirst was stronger than pride. The water was clean, refreshing. The human smiled slightly, and for the first time, the daughters felt unsure. How could one so ordinary bring such comfort? The older sister studied him as he worked. His hands were scarred but steady. He built traps for animals, chopped wood, and repaired fences. These were not acts of soldier, but of someone who survived through skill and patience. And yet, there was something in his silence, something that spoke louder than words. It was not weakness, but strength of a different kind. At night, when the storms raged, the human sat near the fire. He carved small pieces of wood into shapes. The daughters watched quietly. One night, he carved the figure of a bird. He placed it on the table, as if it was nothing. But the younger sister reached for it, her eyes wide. It was fragile, beautiful. A warrior's world had no place for such things. And yet here it was, made by human hands. Back in the void of space, the queen searched restlessly. Her fleets scanned every signal. Her advisors urged war. But her heart told her there was more. Why had her daughters not sent a distress call? Why had their signal gone silent after reaching this human world? The queen's suspicion grew like fire. If the humans had harmed them, she would burn the planet to ash. But something deep inside her whispered another truth. Her daughters were alive, and they were not prisoners. They were hidden. On the planet, danger crept closer. Strange ships were seen in the night sky. The human looked up, his face grim. He had no fleet, no weapons, no army. But his eyes were sharp. The daughters noticed. They realized this man was not blind to threats. He knew danger was near, yet he stayed calm. That calmness unsettled them more than the storm. The younger sister whispered in the dark, "Why do I feel safe here?" The older one did not answer, because she felt it too. Safety was a word unknown to warriors. Safety was weakness, and yet in the arms of a fragile human world, they felt it. The older daughter clenched her fists. She hated the thought, but she could not deny it. For the first time in their lives, they were not just warriors. They were survivors under another's care. The human spoke rarely, but when he did, his words were steady. He pointed to the stars, drew lines in the dirt. He was teaching them something, though they did not yet understand. The daughters began to see a pattern. This man was not just surviving. He was preparing for what they did not yet know. But deep inside, a new fear grew. Not fear of death, but fear of what this human truly was. And so, as the storm broke and the sky cleared, the warrior daughters stood weak but alive. They were strangers on this human world, strangers in a fragile shelter. But fate had brought them here, and somewhere beyond the mountains, danger was waiting. The human knew it, the sisters felt it, and the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The warrior daughters healed slowly. Every day, they tested their strength, pushing against weakness. Every night, they whispered in doubt, asking why they were alive. And every answer pointed back to him, the human. He lived alone in the wilderness, far from the cities. No soldiers came to visit him. No neighbors called his name. He carried no crest, no armor, no banners of power. Yet the daughters began to feel something strange. The ground he walked on seemed safer. The storms around his home seemed weaker, as if the world itself bent to his calm. The older daughter watched him more closely. She studied the way he woke at dawn and checked the sky, the way he sharpened tools not for war, but for survival, the way he stored food in secret places. And she asked herself, is this a simple man, or is he hiding a truth? The younger sister, curious and restless, tried to speak with him. Her words were broken, but his eyes understood more than she expected. When she pointed at the stars, he nodded. When she asked with her hand about the fire, he smiled. There was no fear in him, no greed, no anger. He was patient even when she stumbled in speech. Patience was something rare in their world. Patience was power without shouting. One night, the daughters woke to silence. The storm outside had stopped, but the human was gone. They searched the small shelter with alarm. Their warrior instincts whispered danger. They grabbed what little strength they had and stepped into the cold night. And there he was, standing alone in the clearing. He was staring at the sky, at the ships moving like shadows among the stars. His face was steady, but his fists were tight. He knew they were being watched. He knew danger was near. The sisters froze. They had lived their lives with armies, fleets, and strategies. And yet this man, alone with no army, felt the same weight they did. They returned to the shelter in silence. That night, they did not sleep. They whispered of what he could be. A soldier who abandoned war? A scout hidden on this world? Or something else entirely? Days passed, and the daughters grew stronger. The human began to show them small things. How to light fire without machines. How to find water by listening to the land. How to move through the forest without leaving a trail. The sisters resisted at first, their pride burning. But they could not deny the truth. These lessons were not weakness. They were survival. They realized they had been taught to fight battles. But this man was teaching them how to endure when the battles were lost. The older daughter tested him one evening. She picked up a sharp stone and raised it toward him, not to harm, but to see his reaction. He did not flinch. He simply looked at her, calm and unbroken. For a moment, her warrior heart hesitated, because she saw something she had only seen in her mother's eyes. Unshaken will. Later that night, as the fire burned low, the human spoke words they could not fully understand, but his tone was heavy, filled with memory. He looked into the flames, as if they showed him a past no one else could see. The daughters did not know his story, but they felt the weight of loss in his silence. He was not simply a farmer. He was not simply a wanderer. He was a man carrying wounds deeper than the skin. The younger sister whispered, "He has no army, but he walks like a warrior." The older replied, "He has no crown, but he holds himself like a king." And for the first time, both felt a chill, not of fear, but of respect. Far above the planet, the queen felt her ships closing in. Her advisors grew restless. They warned her the daughters might already be dead. But the queen shook her head. No, she thought, they are alive. Something shields them, something the galaxy does not yet understand. She whispered into the stars, "Show me what holds them." Back in the small human shelter, the daughters lay awake. The younger stared at the wooden bird the human had carved. The older listened to the steady sound of his breath as he slept near the fire. And both realized a truth that unsettled them. They were not only alive because of him, they were safe because of him. And safety, in all their years of war, was a gift they had never known. But questions remained. Why was he alone here? Why did he hide from the rest of his kind? And why did his eyes hold the weight of a man who had seen too much? A human's nature was not weakness. It was mystery, and mystery was far more dangerous than any blade. The quiet days on the human world did not last. The warrior daughters had begun to heal. They could walk without pain, breathe without struggle, and even train their bodies again. But peace was never meant for warriors, and peace was never meant to last. It began with a sound in the night. Not thunder, not beasts, but the low growl of engines moving through the sky. The human heard it first. He stepped outside, his face turning hard. The sisters followed, their sharp eyes searching the stars. There, in the distance, lights flickered like hunting wolves. Enemy ships. The younger sister gripped the older's arm. "They're searching for us," she whispered. The older nodded. "Yes, and they are close." Both expected the human to panic, but he did not. Instead, he crouched, pressing his palm to the ground. He listened not to the sky, but to the earth, as if the planet itself was telling him something. He rose with calm eyes. "We must hide." His voice was quiet but steady. The daughters bristled at the word. Warriors did not hide. They fought, they struck, they bled. But the human shook his head. To fight now is to die. And the weight in his voice silenced them. Through the forest he led them, moving with the silence of a shadow. The sisters tried to match his steps, but he was faster, quieter, sharper. This man, this fragile human, moved like a hunter who had lived his life in war without ever holding a sword. The forest seemed to bend to him. Branches did not break beneath his feet. The wind itself seemed to cover his trail. They reached a hidden cave, small and dark. Inside, the human lit no fire. He simply placed a hand on the stone, as if greeting an old friend. The daughters crouched beside him, their pride burning. Hiding in shadows felt wrong. But the rumble of ships above told them he was right. Sometimes survival was the greater battle. From the cave mouth they watched. Black ships cut through the clouds. Searchlights swept the forest, sharp and hungry. The ground shook as landing craft descended. Enemy raiders, fierce and merciless. The sisters' blood boiled. Their hands twitched for weapons they no longer had. But the human touched their shoulders, steady and firm. "Not yet," his eyes said, and though they hated it, they obeyed. The raiders moved like wolves through the forest. But strange things began to happen. Their steps triggered snares hidden under leaves. Logs swung down from trees, slamming into their ranks. Pitfalls swallowed machines whole. The sisters stared in shock. These traps were simple, primitive, yet deadly. The human had prepared them, not for war but for survival. And now they served as weapons sharper than any blade. The older daughter whispered he knew they would come. The younger replied, "He has been waiting," and the truth sank deep. This man was not just living here. He was guarding this place, watching the skies, preparing for shadows long before they arrived. The raiders grew frustrated, their search scattering. But their leader barked orders, and the hunt grew wider. The human leaned forward, whispering words the sisters barely understood. His plan was clear. Patience, silence, endurance. The storm of enemies would pass, and only then would they strike. Night fell heavy. The forest glowed with searchlights. The raiders burned trees, dragged beasts from the dark. But they did not find the cave. The human had chosen well. The daughters sat in silence, hearts beating with fury. And yet for the first time, they understood. War was not only fought with swords. War was also fought with silence, shadows, and time. Far above, the queen's fleet drew closer. Her advisors warned her not to delay. But the queen's heart told her something else. She felt her daughter's fire still alive, still burning. And in her dreams, she saw a shadowy figure standing beside them. Not an enemy, not a captor, but a human. Back in the cave, the younger sister clenched her fists. "I cannot stay hidden," she hissed. The older pressed her hand gently. "We will wait, we will learn." And as the human's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, they both realized something. This was no ordinary man. This was a force of nature dressed in fragile skin. And the threat outside was only the beginning. The silence in the cave did not last. The enemy was growing impatient. Their ships thundered above the forest, their lights carving the night into sharp pieces. The raiders wanted blood. They wanted capture. They wanted proof of their hunt. And soon, they would come too close. The human knew this. He rose from the stone floor, his eyes steady. The warrior daughters followed him, restless with fury. They wanted to fight. Their warrior blood screamed for battle. But the human held up his hand, calm as always. Not yet. His silence spoke. The sisters clenched their teeth, but they obeyed. When the first raider patrol passed near the cave, the human moved. He slipped into the shadows like smoke. The daughters wanted to charge, but his signal was clear. Follow, but be silent. They moved behind him, and for the first time in their lives, warriors followed instead of leading. The forest was alive with danger. Lights swept the ground. Footsteps broke the silence. Metal clashed as machines marched. The human led them through hidden paths until at last he stopped. Ahead, a squad of raiders had split from the others. Their weapons glowed, their armor thick. The daughters tensed, ready to attack. But the human crouched low. His hands moved swiftly, setting fire to oil-soaked branches hidden in the brush. Moments later, flames roared up. The raiders turned in shock as fire swallowed their path. And then the traps came alive. Logs swung from above, crashing into armored bodies. Pits opened under their feet, swallowing men and machines. In the chaos, the human moved like lightning. He struck with no weapon, but with precision. A push here, a trip there, turning the raiders against the very forest they had entered. The daughters could not believe their eyes. They were trained to fight with blades, guns, and steel. But this man fought with earth, fire, and patience. Every step had been prepared long before the raiders even landed. This was not random. This was mastery. The older daughter finally leapt into the battle. Her warrior blood demanded it. She struck a raider with her bare hands, and the younger joined her. Together, the sisters fought with fury. But even in their strength, they noticed something. The human was not only surviving, he was guiding the battle. Every movement of the enemy fell into his plan. Every trap they stumbled into had been waiting for years. One raider leader broke through the flames. His armor black, his weapon glowing red. He roared as he charged. The daughters stepped forward, ready to meet him head on, but the human's voice cut through the chaos. Wait! He pulled on a hidden rope, and above them, a massive net of stones came crashing down. The leader fell without even touching them. The human exhaled, steady as ever. The daughters stared, shaken. He had defeated the strongest one without lifting a sword. More enemies came, but the forest itself seemed to rebel against them. Animals scattered, trees cracked, the ground split under hidden traps. The raiders began to panic. They had expected easy prey, not a battlefield crafted by human hands. The daughters, breathing hard, stood beside the human now. They did not see him as fragile anymore. They saw him as something far greater, a protector who used his world as his weapon. When at last the remaining raiders fled, their screams fading into the night, silence returned. The human stood in the ashes, calm. The daughters were covered in sweat and blood, their hearts racing. But the human only nodded once, as if this victory was nothing more than another day. The younger sister whispered, "He fights without weapons." The older replied, "He does not fight at all, he outsmarts." Far above the world, the queen's ship caught fragments of the battle. She heard broken transmissions, cries of her enemies, reports of traps and fire. Her heart clenched. Her daughters were alive, but the name whispered in those broken messages chilled her. Human. That word, once meaningless in her empire, now carried the weight of fear. On the ground, the daughters looked at the human. They had fought wars across stars, faced enemies with fire and steel. But tonight they had seen something new. Humans did not fight with strength alone. They fought with the world itself. And in that truth was a power more dangerous than any weapon. The human sat by the fire once more, his hand steady as he carved another piece of wood. The daughters watched in silence. For the first time in their lives, warriors felt small beside a man with no army. The clash was over, but the storm was only beginning, because now the enemy knew, and soon the queen herself would know, that the safe place her daughters had found was not weakness. It was humanity. The queen's warship cut through the darkness of space like a blade. Her eyes burned with fury, but her heart carried hope. She had searched across systems, chased broken signals, and followed whispers. And every trail, every shadow, every clue pointed to this world. A quiet human world, forgotten by most, but now heavy with secrets. Her general spoke of battle. They urged her to unleash fire upon the planet. Your daughters may already be dead, they warned. But the queen silenced them with a single look. She was not only a ruler, she was a mother, and a mother knew her daughters were alive. The fleet spread across the sky, scanning, searching, measuring every pulse of the planet below. At last, a signal sparked on her screen, faint but familiar. Her daughters, their energy patterns, their blood, their fire, alive. The queen rose from her throne, her chest tightening. Prepare the descent, she ordered. Her warship began to sink into the clouds. On the surface, the warrior daughters felt the air tremble. The human lifted his head, his calm eyes sharp. The sisters knew this power. They felt it in their bones. Their mother was near. The younger's heart raced. She is coming, she whispered. The older clenched her fists, torn between joy and fear. Would their mother see the truth? Would she understand? When the queen landed, the ground itself seemed to bow. Her soldiers spread out, weapons ready, but she ignored them all. Her steps were fast, heavy with desperation. And then she saw them. Her daughters, alive, standing strong. Her breath caught. Her heart broke with relief. She wanted to run, to hold them, but her eyes froze, because standing beside them was a man, a human. For a moment, silence held the world. The queen's soldiers raised their weapons, but the daughters stepped forward, blocking their path. No, the older said, her voice sharp. The younger added, he is not the enemy. The queen's heart twisted. Her daughters, her warriors, her blood, defending a human. Confusion raged in her mind. Why would they trust him? Why would they protect him? The human did not bow. He did not kneel. He stood with calm eyes, steady as the mountains behind him. He carried no blade, no armor, no shield. Yet he faced the queen of the Krell Empire without fear. And that unsettled her more than any enemy fleet. The queen demanded answers. Her voice thundered like storms. What have you done to my daughters? She cried. But her daughters stepped closer to him. He saved us, the younger said, her voice trembling. He protected us when all else was lost, the older added. The queen's soldiers murmured in disbelief. A human? A protector? Impossible. But the truth burned in her daughter's eyes. The queen studied the man. She saw no strength in his arms, no weapons at his side. But his eyes held something deeper, a quiet will, unbroken even under her gaze. She recognized it. It was the same fire she carried in her own heart. Not the fire of armies, but the fire of survival. The fire of those who refused to bend. Her general shouted for action. Kill him, they demanded. But the daughters raised their voices as one. No, they cried. He is our safe place. The queen froze at those words. Safe place. Her daughters, warriors born for war, had never used those words before. Not in her palace, not in her empire, not even in her arms. But here, on this fragile human world, with this man, they spoke it. The queen's chest tightened. She saw how they stood near him, not as captives, not as pawns, but as family. Her mind fought against it, but her heart whispered the truth. This man, this human, had done what no empire could. He had given her daughters something beyond strength. He had given them safety. Slowly, the queen lowered her hand. Her soldiers hesitated, their weapons trembling. She stepped forward, closer to the human. He did not move, did not flinch. For a long moment their eyes met, a queen and a man, a ruler of empires and a wanderer of forests. And in that silence she saw him. Not weakness, not fragility, but a strength that did not need to shout. At last the queen spoke, her voice soft. "You are the reason my daughters live." The human gave no reply, only a small nod. The queen turned to her daughters. "You call him safe place," she said, her voice breaking. "And so he is." The night sky burned with the glow of her ships. The soldiers waited for orders, but the queen gave none. She simply stood, her eyes on the man who had protected her blood. And in her heart, a dangerous thought began to grow. If one human could do this, what else could their kind be hiding? The night after the queen's arrival was heavy with silence. The forest no longer echoed with raider engines. The fire in the humans' shelter burned steady, casting long shadows on the walls. The warrior daughters sat close, their eyes fixed on both their mother and the man who had saved them. The air between them carried tension sharper than any blade. The queen did not sleep. She stood outside, staring at the sky where her fleet hung like a crown of fire. Her heart was torn in two. One half was a ruler's duty, reminding her that humans were weak, unimportant, disposable. The other half was a mother's truth, reminding her that this human had done what armies could not. He had returned her daughters alive. At dawn, the human stepped outside. He carried a bucket of water, moved with quiet strength, and began his simple work. The queen watched him with narrow eyes. He showed no fear of her, no awe of her ships, no hunger for reward. He simply worked. To him, survival was not glory, it was life. That simplicity unsettled her more than any weapon. The daughters joined him. They fetched wood, tended the fire, even helped repair the fence around the shelter. The queen could hardly believe her eyes. Her warrior children, trained to command fleets, now following the rhythm of a man with no crown. And they did it not with shame, but with quiet respect. Later, the queen demanded to speak with him. Her generals surrounded them, their weapons ready. But the man stepped forward without fear. The queen asked him why he risked his life for strangers, why he protected her daughters when he had nothing to gain. The human looked at her, his voice calm. "Because they were lost," he said. "Because no one deserves to die alone." The words were simple, but they cut through the queen's armor. For all her empires, all her victories, she had never heard such truth. Her world was built on strength, on dominance, on survival through power. But this man spoke of survival through care. And somehow, that truth was stronger. The daughters stepped beside him, their voices clear. "He gave us food when we had nothing. He gave us shelter when the storm was death. He gave us safety when we had no weapons." The queen listened, her heart trembling. Her daughters had faced wars and enemies across the stars. Yet the first time they spoke of feeling safe was here, beside a human. Her general scoffed. "Humans are nothing," they said, but the queen silenced them, her voice sharp. "Nothing does not save warriors," she replied. The human stood still, his calm like stone, and in that moment, the queen saw him clearly. Not as fragile, not as weak, but as rare. That night, around the fire, the queen spoke to her daughters. She asked them if they would return home. They shook their heads, their voices strong. "Not yet," said the older. "We still have more to learn," said the younger. The queen's heart ached, but she understood. They were warriors, yet here they had found something their empire had never given them. The strength of another way. The human listened quietly, saying nothing. He did not ask them to stay. He did not beg for their company. And perhaps that was the greatest power of all. He gave without demand. He offered without chains. And in that freedom, trust was born. When the queen returned to her fleet, whispers spread through her ranks. The story of her daughters, the traps, the battle, the human protector. Her soldiers could not believe it, yet they repeated it. And soon, it spread beyond her fleet. Carried from ship to ship, world to world. The word human no longer sounded small. It carried weight. Across the galaxy, enemies and allies alike began to hear the tale. The Krell Queen's daughters had gone missing, and a single human had been their safe place. Some laughed, some doubted, but all remembered. Because in a galaxy of endless wars, hope was rare. And this story carried hope. The Queen stood once more at her throne, her eyes distant. She had seen armies crumble, empires rise and fall. But in that small human shelter, she had seen something greater. Not the power of weapons, but the power of will. Not the fear of enemies, but the gift of safety. And that was what made humans dangerous. Not their strength, but their spirit. Not their weapons, but their hearts. The Queen whispered to herself, "The galaxy will learn their name." Her daughters stood taller, their eyes bright. The human returned to his fire, his hands carving another piece of wood. And somewhere in the shadows of the universe, the story of humanity had already begun to spread. Because in the darkest times, when warriors fall and empires burn, the safe place is not found in steel or fire. It is found in the hands of a human.